Welcome to the Next Pivot Point podcast. This season, I am focused on sharing stories and ideas from experts on diversity and inclusion. This week, in this episode, I'll share some insights and ideas from my guest expert, Terrance. Together, we will leave you with some actionable tips to think about and discuss with your organization. We share this information because inclusive leadership is a journey and requires bravery and courage, and you do not have to do it alone. At Next Pivot Point, I believe we're stronger together. We are one. So let's meet Terrance. I'm so excited. He has been a developer in the software industry for the past decade, a true Southern boy at heart, which we will talk about. And originally from Georgia, his entry into the tech field started in the Department of Defense. Fresh out of college and eager to make a difference, his experience working on naval submarine software taught him the basics of software development and teamwork. Great experiences there eventually led to more engineering projects involving both the United States Army and later the intelligence community. His latest venture has been improving strategies to help advance the Medicare programs in the healthcare industry. All of these experiences have eventually led him to help inspire others so they can find their true potential. Welcome, Terrance. So good to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Good to be here, man. That was
Awesome.
great intro.
What
I
was your
love that.
bio? It sounds really good, doesn't
It
it?
sounds good coming out of your mouth, though. The words, the way you said it was perfect. I love
Well,
it.
I'm so excited to dig in. We got to know each other as many in this diversity and equity and inclusion environment that we're in, caring about
hmm
people and development, and you being in the tech industry and caring about bringing people in and solving big problems.
hmm
We got connected over a very similar passion around that. We had a very candid conversation about race and gender and all the problems in your tech industry, but also bigger problems in society at large and what
Absolutely.
we can do about it as allies. So I thought this would be a really good conversation to dig in to as an African American man that grew up in the South that
hmm
now lives in Baltimore. So I know we talked about regional differences and your own upbringing and background as a part of your story and
hmm
being one of the only, in that tech industry and in the industries you've served in your career. So Terrance,
hmm
let's start at how you grew up. Like what was it like to grow up in Georgia?
Absolutely. Let's get into it. So like you said, I grew up in, Augusta, Georgia. Um, I think, and I was born in '87. So actually, I was born in Germany. Both my parents are military, and we came over 1990 to Augusta, Georgia. And then from there, for like 20 years, I was there, and then I moved to Maryland. But yeah, man, I grew up in Georgia. My half my family's in Georgia, the other half's in North Carolina. I didn't notice, since we're talking about diversity and race, and as we get to it, I didn't notice it that early when I was a kid. Right, when you're a kid, you're playing with everybody. You don't know, it's just more evidence that it's such a teachable thing, like racism and things like that, and treating people differently. It's such a it's taught, right? It's a
Mm-hmm.
taught thing. And because when we were kids, everybody was playing with everybody. I had a conversation with my mom about that the other day. She
Mm-hmm.
remembered like dropping me off, and like a few times. I was a bus kid, okay, from the jump. But she would drop me off like once or twice, she didn't have to work. And she just remembers seeing me just playing with everybody. And then
Mm-hmm.
around middle school is when it creeped in. I remember very vividly, I was on a bus and we were coming into
Hmm.
school, and it was segregated. And I just noticed at 11, 10, 11, years old, it was white kids on one side and it was the black kids on the other side. And I'm
Wow.
like 10 and I noticed this. And I was like, okay, let's tuck that back. And I didn't do anything or say anything to anybody. That was weird. So it started happening around middle school. And then you started seeing the Confederate flag emblems, and again, it's Georgia. So it's really, really, really out and open. I see it
Yeah.
a few places here and there. But down there, it would be people in school. It would be people with the belts with the emblems. It would be people with the truck decals, the license plates, everything. And I just saw it. And honestly, it didn't really, you see it so much at such a young age when you're 12, 13. So by the time you're 18, 19, I was so used to seeing it. I didn't think, I mean, I'm not going to say I didn't think it was a big deal, but it was normalized for me.
Right.
Just like the overall, like, kind of like racism is. If you grew up in this, I'm not gonna say if you grew up in the South. I'm gonna talk about myself. Speak for myself. Me growing up in the South, I got normalized to certain things. I got normalized to rednecks. I got normalized to just it being a certain way, out in the open, racism,
Yeah.
backwardsness, good old boy stuff. It's just you get so ingrained to the culture. You just like, hey, it's almost like you just throw your hands up in the air. It's like, well, this is what it is. This is where I'm at. This is gonna be my life. This is, this is just I can't help the
Mhm.
situation. So it was a lot of that feeling too. Um, and then I go off to college, and I don't know if I told you this story, but there was a um, one of my friends had was in class or whatever, and a teacher was giving him bad grades. Long, excuse me. Long story short, he complained because he thought he was. I told him he was just getting the wrong answers. That's friend. That's good friend support. Like, but you
Sure, like
just
that makes sense. That's
yeah,
logical.
you're just messing up, man. Don't go blame the teacher. He's like, no, man, she's doing it because she don't like me. Come to find out, this teacher was doing it against, like, I want to say 2 or 3 other black kids. They eventually fired her because I guess they just did an investigation and compared test results. And I don't think that's an easy thing to do to get rid of a professor at a college.
Hmm.
And this was in 2008. So when that happened, I was like, whoa, okay, they're actually giving lower grades in 2008 to some kids in college.
Right.
All right, that happened. There was even growing up in Georgia, I would go to my grandma's house, who um, I don't know how deep we want to get, but I'll get pretty
Yeah, go for it.
open. So my grandma, rest her soul, she passed away, I want to say 2 years ago,
I'm
and she was like
sorry.
90, 92 when she did. So she lived a full life. But she was born in 20, oh, I'm gonna mess it up. I want to say 1927. So
She
she
saw
like
a lot in her life.
she saw a lot in her life, right? This is deep South Georgia, 1927. Her mom died at 3. Her mom was a sharecropper. My grandma, my actual mom's mom, couldn't even finish school. She went to school until she was like, I don't know, like 7, 8, and then she had to serve lunch because this is deep South Georgia, and she grew up in the 20s. So you already know what it kind of was. She had to serve lunch to the kids, to the boys. I want to say to the white kids, but I know for sure it was a little racism, it was a little sexism. So I think all the women had to, for some reason, serve lunch to the kids. And I think because she was black, they made it seem like in my family, she was just in the cafeteria constantly. So she didn't get past like 7, 8. I don't know what grade that is when you're like 8 years old. I don't know, second grade, third grade, whatever. But she pretty much has like a third grade education. But the smartest, wisest woman you've ever met in your
I
life.
bet.
Like just whoa, like crazy. So that's a generation removed. That's my mom's mom couldn't even finish school
When
in
she was
Georgia.
only a generation or so from slavery.
And she was a generation from slavery. Her mom was a sharecropper, you
Right.
know? And we're talking 1800s. So, when people say, oh, I don't understand why, um, you know, black people are in this situation or they live in these areas or why they behave this way or why we do this and why we
Right.
do that. It's not, you got to look at, it's us, but you got to look at what brought us here. Some people are a generation away from slavery
Yeah.
where people owned us. And for
Mm.
us, if for other people to have the perspective of, oh, why can't they just get it together, quote unquote, or pull themselves up on the
Right.
bootstraps? I mean, come on. This is like, it's been systemic oppression for a long time. So people
Yeah.
cannot, they just can't ignore that, and there's a lot of historical policies and things like that, redlining and, just all kinds of stuff. But that's down the road. So yeah. So to finish that story up, so she was, she didn't finish school, smart as a whip. And the point I'm making is on the way to her house, I lived in Augusta. She lived in Bartow, Louisville, Georgia, which is really, really, really southern. And we would pass by a slavery bell. And I'm a kid,
Oh,
and I'm like, I didn't even know what it was. So my mom points out to me this thing in town. It's literally in the middle of the town. They dress it up for Christmas. They put
wow.
Christmas lights on it. So this is where we at, right? So I'm growing up going to my grandma's house once a week. Mom says, you know what that is? I'm like, what? She's like, oh, that's a slavery belt where they used to sell black people. It's
Mm.
literally a bell in the middle of the town where they used to ring, where they used to just sell black people. And I would pass this, going to my family, going to my grandma's house, going to my auntie's house, going to my uncle's house. I would see this thing after she told me. And she didn't have to tell me, but my mom's such a G. She told me because she wanted me to know what it
Mhm.
is. You know what I mean? So, ain't nothing but respect for her for that. But so yeah, man, this is
Mm.
what I was seeing growing up. And again, I didn't realize the impact. I knew what they were, but I didn't know what they were. Like,
Yeah.
I know what this is, but when you're 17, 16, somebody tell you what a slavery bell is, it's a different hit when you're 30 or
Yeah.
25. And oh, wow, that was a slavery bell.
And it's
And
still
so,
there. And there's no
and it's
shame in
still there.
displaying it and decorating it, which
They
is
decorate it, truly.
really troubling that we're not even um, owning that part of our negative history, that we want to correct that. And I think for white people, sometimes it's really hard. On the other side of this is, well, that's our history, these statues, the bells. I mean, even though it's such a really negative part of our history, it's always interesting to hear that response to that. But hearing your response can really elicit empathy, I think, for our listeners to know what it's like to have Black skin, to see these replicas reinforcing not only the separation of white people and Black people,
Mm-hmm.
but the actual oppression and physical abuse and
Mm-hmm.
ownership of you
Brutality.
and your
Yeah,
family in your generations. Like you said, it's not even, we're not even like, we're like 3 or 4 generations
that's
back. I
it.
mean, looking at your grandmother. And so when you think about systemic racism, how could we erase centuries of racism
Mm-hmm.
in just the last century or so, which we haven't done a great job of? I mean, even the last wave of civil rights, the Voting Rights Act has been scaled back since
Mm-hmm.
the 60s. A lot of those wins have been
They've been, yep.
erased. So you talk about redlining, you talk about education, access to housing, political zones. I mean, all of these things that I think people are more have on their radar now, these systemic issues reinforced with, like you said, the imagery of whether it's the South or just anywhere in our history, we can find these stories. And we're not
Hmm.
often taught these stories in history class
Okay.
either, which is also disturbing. If we don't know the
You you
problem, we can't
you
fix
want to
it.
know something crazy? Like, and this is embarrassing, but I'm just gonna say it.
Please.
I did not know. Just to prove that point, they don't really teach this stuff. I had no idea. I knew who Malcolm X was, but I didn't really know who Malcolm X was until my 20s. Like
Yeah. As a
going
Black man, you did
as a
not
black
know a
bro,
huge
I'm
Black
telling you,
male
I
figure.
knew who he was. I saw his face. I was like, that's Malcolm X. But I didn't know his story. You know what I mean? I
Right.
didn't know he was a criminal. Then he went to jail. Then he started reading. Like I didn't know the story of Malcolm X
Yep. Yep.
until and I'm like, yeah, some of that's on me. I'll take ownership of that. Obviously, I'm a person. I can investigate, do my own research, but it's not taught. And I feel like people
Mm,
like that are such an integral part in our history. They're choosing what to replicate, what to teach to kids,
yeah,
right?
because
And
Martin Luther
so,
King is taught, right? But
well,
why not
yeah,
Malcolm X?
well, you know
Right.
why. Well, I have my own theory. I don't want to
Well,
get on
you tell
that.
me. No, I'm so curious because
So
we're specifically not taught about certain individuals because they're
right.
problematic for the patriarchy and white supremacy.
I think well, there's a lot of truth to Malcolm, and it was a lot of you do this to me, it was an eye for an eye. You do this, I'm gonna do that. So he was a lot more militant in that regard. Like if he was like, we're gonna guard our own community, we're going to take care of ourselves, and we're not gonna let anybody take from us. And some people in that time didn't like it, and some people still don't like that mentality. They
Right.
want to and I think that's why they don't talk about Malcolm X and other people like that or Huey Newton or anybody, because it's we're giving you what you're giving us, and people don't like that.
Right.
They don't
Way
they
to
want to.
compromise like
Yeah,
Martin Luther King did. Yeah.
exactly. He was a peaceful, compromising, great man, and they like that part about him because
Hmm.
he would turn the other cheek. They would do something, and he would turn the other cheek. You know what I mean? And I
Hmm.
think that's why he's so revered, and he should be revered for that, obviously, because that takes a strong type of character. You really got to be in tune with yourself to do
Yeah.
stuff like that. But I don't know if I'm like that today. I don't know if I've ever been like that. And I think that's my theory on why they don't talk about them.
Yeah, I
Um,
hear you.
and why they talk about, like, even I remember being in world history class, and my teacher, shout out to Miss Snowberger. She's such a good teacher. She pulls me aside. I'm 10th grade now. So this is like me, right? So you're talking to me now. So imagine me 16 years old. We're having first day of class, world history class. My teacher pulls me aside before the class starts and says, Terrance, this is world history, but we're not going to talk about world history. We're going to talk about Western European history, essentially, Western civilizations and things like that. She was essentially telling me we're going to talk about the Western world, European history before the class even started, before we actually went through the semester. And I was like, okay. And I was fine in the class because she already knew what I was going to say first day. Why are we talking about all these same people over and over, like constantly, like month after month? It's the same. I feel like it's the same figures that they tell you about, that they want you to learn their history.
Yeah,
We don't know our history. We know that y'all, we know
right. White
white
European
European
history.
history. And I'm like, these
Exactly.
people did not invent everything. There's no way. They didn't, what I'm saying? Like there's more people, there's more discoveries, there's more inventions by people that don't look
I
like this. So why aren't we
know.
talking about them? And so that used to bother me. So, but she pulled me aside. So shout out to her. But I was just bubbling because she knew me,
Yeah.
and
And it takes teachers like that that are willing to have those hard conversations with kids and to know if you do talk about Black history or racism, what that feels like maybe to be the only Black kid in class or one of the few that are
oh,
learning it alongside white children. But for the most part, you're right. It's white history.
it's
Everyone's
white
just
history,
called
man.
white American
And
history.
then everybody just looks at you when every time they talk about somebody Black. Like I
Yeah,
wasn't the
well,
only
you
Black
must
person
know
in
about
class.
this.
Yeah, clearly, yeah. Oh, Terrance, dude, out here. I don't know this stuff.
I had a moment, a really embarrassing moment, but I'll own this and my vulnerability as a white person on my journey. I co-facilitate privilege workshops and talk about white privilege and unpacking racism for white people with an African American woman, a good friend of mine, Erica. And I
Yeah.
remember the first time we taught it, I was nervous, right? It was the first time teaching this, and we were
Okay.
co-facilitating it together in a way that honored, kind of the white perspective and obviously the very important Black perspective. And we pulled up the history, that we're not taught in schools with the timeline of all of the wins, but all of the setbacks.
Hmm.
We talk about slavery being abolished by good old Abraham Lincoln, but we don't talk about the Jim Crow laws that like
Hmm.
basically reinforced slavery for another
All that
60
crazy
years.
stuff.
Yeah, so
Right.
we don't talk about all the setbacks that happen after, gotten glossed over that. And I remember turning to Erica and be like, oh yeah, this is Black history. Erica, that you'd be better to talk about this. Like, oh, shame on
Oh,
me.
oh
And I
no.
remember 5 minutes later being like, what did I just do? But I felt like it wasn't my history to share, which is so wrong. It's all of
Right.
our history. But I do think, in my
I know what you
defense,
meant.
it's reinforced in this narrative that we learn in our education processes about separate histories, right? That's
Right.
that history. This is this history. The history I learned was very whitewashed. And so that's the one I would know
Exactly.
to teach. And so I was relearning. And she is so good that she said, I've been living this for 45 years. It's all right. I got this. Like she is
Oh
so
wow.
good at
That's
owning
awesome.
that and saying, for white people, I think a lot of times we're just waking up to the fact that this happens. I haven't walked around in Black or brown skin, so I don't know what it's like. Sure, I've
Right.
had friends that provide windows into that world, but I live in a white community, like many white people do.
Hmm.
75% of us live in white communities still.
Hmm.
So how would you know? And then this is a huge problem. If you're not taught in school, you don't have, you're kept away, redlined
Hmm.
away from being with
Hmm.
people of color. How the heck do you learn this stuff unless you're willing to do really hard work and buy books and listen to podcasts like this? So I
Right.
guess here's a question for you. Thanks so much for your vulnerability and your stories. What do you like? What do you say when white people are like, I just don't see it? Like, I don't get what this whole fuss is about with Black Lives Matter. Like, I just don't get it. Like, does this stuff really still
Hmm.
happen? Like, I think people are still there, even when they watch George Floyd video.
Hmm.
I think I've heard this enough to know white people still think this is like isolated events.
Right. Right. Yeah. So Oh yeah. So I was just thinking when you were talking about all kinds of stuff that, like entered my mind. But I think the main I don't know. I can't, I don't know what's in people's heads. So I don't want to say what is happening from their perspective, but from my perspective, as far as like why do I think they just see that and think that's a one-off? Um, I think it matters how you grow up, meaning
Mm,
because there's
yeah.
white people that see that and be like, this is a freaking problem,
Yeah.
and I have to do more about this. I think that goes back to the experiences and the biases that get formed in that person's brain the last 30 or 40 years they grew up. How,
Mhm.
how were you taught? What kind of friends did you have? Were your parents, did they teach you, not to discriminate? Did you have black friends? Did you have Asian friends? Did you have Hispanic? Like, did you have friends who didn't look like you? I think all those things matter in life. Did you have good experiences with people? With people of color? Like, do you like? I think that really matters. There's been people I've worked with people who I know I'm the first black person they've ever seen in their life by
Wow.
far. I'm talking 25, 26 years old, went through college, went through school. I'm the first one you actually talk to who didn't say hey or bye to. I can tell. A, you're nervous. You're really
Mhm.
nervous for no reason. You're talking weird. And like
What
I'm
is
telling you,
talking weird?
it's
What do people
oh
do?
my God, they get I can't even describe. There's so many people in my head right now, one in particular, who I don't even want to go there, man. But it's just
Like I hear
like,
like, oh, would you like to do this? Or it's almost like sometimes I've seen it happen where it's almost like a child like talking to you, or if you want to be
yeah.
like overly kind in the fact that it just feels so inauthentic.
Oh, yes. I'm glad you said that. Overly kind, overly, oh, is this okay? Is that okay? Um, Overly, like over the top. I'm like, bro, chill. Um, Thinking,
Because I don't want
like,
to be called a
literally,
racist. I don't want anyone to think I'm a racist, but I'm so
I mean,
uncomfortable right now.
well, right. So it's just things like that. Like, I can tell. So I think to answer your question, I went off on a tangent, but to answer your question, I think it depends on how you grew up. So on the opposite side of that is the person who grew up in a household where, racist or discriminatory things were taught. They went to a school where all white folks went. Not only all white folks, but people in the same status. And because I think racism is not just racism; it's racism and classism.
Yeah.
It's really combined with money. And really, we can't have a conversation about racism until we have a conversation about um, equity.
Yep.
Like we talk about inequality and justice. Well, let's talk about equity too, because we need to catch up.
Yep.
And that's just I don't think you can have that talk about, oh, pat on the back, pull your self up by your bootstrap. Oh, we're gonna fix police reform. We're gonna do this. We're going to have community research. Yeah, we need all that too, but we need equity. We need actual
Yep.
tangible things to advance us
Resources.
to the point where we should have been if we weren't owned,
Right.
basically. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, if
So
you think about the systemic, if you've only been able to accumulate wealth, I mean,
exactly.
even if you're optimistic and say the 1870s, which we
Right.
know really wasn't true because Jim Crow and how hard it was for people to actually leave slavery, if
1970.
you're really thinking about it, it's probably like 1960s when you
Yeah, I'm
really
saying
start accumulating
1970.
wealth. Maybe even later, right? I don't even want to say what your decade is. We're like talking maybe 50 years where white
Right.
people have been able to accumulate wealth
Accumulate
and inherit money generation after generation
forever.
for hundreds, yeah, forever, for as long
Forever.
as money has been around. And so
And
when
it's
I
like
think
people
about
don't
it
see
that
that.
way, it becomes really clear why there's still problems. If you don't
Exactly.
have access to resources, of course, you're not going to be able to
Right.
attend the higher end schools. You're not going to be able to
Yep.
buy the higher end houses. You're not going to be able
Yep.
to live in communities that are safe, right?
Yep.
So all of these things have to do with the systemic problem with wealth accumulation. And we know that white people on average have 13 times higher wealth than black people
13 times.
in 2020. I mean, when I saw that stat, it was just like being slapped in the face. And
That's crazy.
I think, Terrance, the problem with white people that don't see racism, I think, is because they think they worked hard for what they have. So
Mm.
maybe they're not one of the ones that accumulated wealth from their parents or their family that didn't grow up with a silver
Mm.
spoon. So it's like, well, I worked hard. And honestly, I could easily fall into this camp as being raised, no, I wouldn't say poor, but with low disposable income with a single mom.
Hmm.
We lived in a very small apartment in an area of town that was a suburb, but still was not, it was not the nice part of town. I'll just say it that
Hmm.
way. Still, definite white privilege.
Hmm.
But I remember thinking, well, I worked hard. You just need to work hard too. Like, what's all this fuss about? And
So it's
obviously, I've been
interesting.
awoken to this. But I think a lot of white people, especially ones that worked hard for it, are
Yeah,
most likely to
they're
not
the
get it.
ones, right?
Right.
It's interesting because it's not about who's working hard or who's not working hard. Because I totally understand that, especially I thought about that too. I hear it all the time. Well, I worked hard for what I got. I'm sure you did, but you'd have to work harder if you were black, and that's the point I'm making. And it
Yep.
shouldn't be like
Yep.
that. You'd have to
Yep.
work harder if you were black. You'd have to work harder if you were, Mexican. You would have to work harder if you were a woman. Let's talk about that,
Yeah.
dudes. Like, let's
Well,
not act
women of
like
color, just think about like, whoa, worlds colliding. I mean, once I started to
right.
understand those experiences, like,
I
oh
mean,
my gosh.
it's just like it's 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 and they feel like you're taking something from them. I think because they
Yeah.
feel like, oh, I worked hard for what I have. I don't want to give blah blah blah. I don't want to. This is all made up, and it's like, yes, you work very hard for what you have. I guarantee you, you'd have to work twice as hard if your skin was darker. And I don't know why they can't see that because that doesn't discredit what the work that they've done. It just opens that extra window in their mind, like, oh, I see your point. You're saying
Mhm.
I worked hard, I deserve this stuff, but if I were you, I would have to. It would have took me longer to accumulate the success.
Yeah.
And that's why I don't under. That's the breakdown. I don't see why they can't understand that part, because that doesn't take away from anything they've done.
No.
And it's also a matter of willingness. Um, but but yeah, so I think when people see that Black Lives Matter stuff and when the George Floyd thing happened and they just say, oh, this is a one-off, um, I think some of it's fear.
Yeah.
They're just scared, which I don't know where the fear comes from. Like
Like,
we're
you're
not,
safe. You're not the one that's getting
yeah,
murdered. So
right. Like
why are you scared?
why
Yeah.
are you scared of me, or why are you scared of anybody who like I don't know. I think a lot of it's fear. I think a lot of it's stoked fear too. A lot of it's fan, how they say, fanning the flames. A lot of it's
Oh yeah.
that just working on people's own internal like insecurities and things like that. But I think it really depends on how you grow up. If you don't interact with people of color who are different from you, when you see a person of color on the TV getting choked out, why would you even you don't interact with anybody black or anybody
Yeah.
any of any person. All your friends look like you. So to you, it's a one-off because you don't live in that world, you know? You don't see it
Mm-hmm.
because you're not living it. You don't have
Yeah.
any. I would say to people who are like that, who want to do things, make friends or just talk to people who don't look like you and understand.
Right.
And trust me, we will talk to you. Understand us, understand what we're saying, we'll understand what you're saying. I mean, obviously, you got to find the right person. You can't just talk to anybody. I get that too. But
And be careful how you start the
hey, man,
conversation.
right? It's crazy
Get to know
people
somebody first.
of all races. Okay, trust me, everybody's crazy. But it's like
Wait, your skin color doesn't dictate
exactly, bro.
craziness? No.
Just find the right person and just talk to them. And I guarantee you, if you start making, some more friends, people of color, I guarantee you the next time, quote unquote, this happens, when you see another
Right.
George Floyd on TV, you will feel different. Your heartstrings will pull a little different. I guarantee you. Um, if you knew, if you had a friend who would experience that, because now you're looking at it as your friend or your coworker that you're really close with,
Right.
or it's a different feeling. Oh, because that could be your friend now.
Yeah. It's
That could be
personal.
it's personal, and it's not personal for a lot of people because they just
Yeah.
don't have any. They just talk to people who look like themselves. So that's what I think it is. On that whole, I was really thinking about that answer for a while.
No, no, Terrance, I think you got us there. I mean, get to know people different than you in a genuine way.
In a
You know,
genuine
I,
way.
I was
Yeah.
so thankful I had a few people I could reach out to, friends of color after George Floyd, just to check in on them and see how they were doing and the process, how
Oh,
they
that's
were
another thing
receiving
too.
it.
Yeah.
It was just, I was so thankful I was in a better place where a few years ago, even I probably wouldn't have been there. And so it's an
Hmm.
intentional effort. But now hearing stories, I mean, I had a man share with me that he was up all night watching the CNN footage, like
Hmm.
all night crying, watching it.
Wow.
George Floyd, you know, things like
Yeah.
that people have shared with me that I'm like, it doesn't feel that way to me. But now that I've
Hmm.
heard your story, I understand how it feels through your eyes. And if I'm really being empathetic, that's
Hmm.
terrible. And so the next time it happens, I will be much more engaged in knowing those feelings and tuning into those feelings and channeling those feelings of others myself.
You know what's crazy, Julie? Like really, really crazy? When I saw the George Floyd thing, I saw it. I didn't break down. I didn't cry. I literally saw it. This is just speaks to the culture of just where we are. I saw it on TV and I'm like, I shook my head and I was like, this don't make no sense. I cursed or whatever. And then
Yeah.
I just went about my day because I
Yeah.
was like, this
I just
happens
thought I was like,
so
well, this
much.
happened again. I was like, well, whatever, moving on. And then when everyone kept talking about it, I was like, why are people paying attention this time? This happens all the time. I
And it's
hated
so
that I was
sad.
so dismissed. I was so dismissive of it as well. And I'm so
I,
thankful it didn't get dismissed, but we've been
right.
taught that. We've been taught and conditioned that
Yeah.
Black lives don't matter as much. I mean, that's why we have the hashtag. That's why we have the movement.
It's
These
normalized,
things
man.
happen a lot. Just like you said, the normalized feelings growing up of just, yeah, this is how it is. We're treated differently. It's
It's
amazing
interesting.
how we get so used to the programming we get from society,
Yep.
from the media, from our networks. We're conditioned. And as human
Conditions.
beings, we are a tribal species. We get this works. It's effective. It's effective at keeping systems intact.
In place, keeping things in place.
Well, I hope, yeah, I'm like you. I hope that there's not another tragedy like this. But of course, we've had a tragedy since, and we will have tragedies in the future. And so,
I'm
for white
optimistic.
people, I think listening, or for those that don't identify as Black, whatever it is, wherever you're coming from an ally perspective, or if you know people that don't get it, how can you
Right.
be an ally and create some pathways and bridges to increase
Here's another
understanding?
thing, though, Julie. I feel like I agree with everything you're saying, but I also feel like the time is on our side because when you look at the George Floyd protests, they were all people of my generation, really, the millennials. And I love my generation, and I feel like because to us, racism is not we don't care
Yeah,
about it. So I just feel like I'm not going to spend my time and energy trying to convince people that they shouldn't be racist. I'm just going to wait out the clock because honestly,
it's getting more and more diverse.
bro, I'm waiting the clock out. These people with these old stupid ideas are going to die out, right?
Yeah,
And the millennials eventually will take over. And I'm just hoping that the world's going to get better because I'm not wasting my energy. There's nothing I can tell a racist person for them not to be racist.
yeah,
There's nothing I can say
yeah.
because it's all out here. I can't. Maybe you like me in the way I talk, and maybe you would say, oh, okay, I like this person. He's Black. Okay, I could maybe open up some more, but I'm not wasting my energy. Like,
Right. And we shouldn't, right? Like 20% of the population does not support equality, which is quite alarming. But the
yeah,
other
I
thing
don't
is
have time
not
for these
worth our
people.
time.
I don't have time for these people. Like,
Right.
let's live your life. Hopefully, you know, um, those ideas won't grow past you, and
Right.
the generations, because it's different generation every time, and hopefully the next generation, my generation, when we finally, I don't know, maybe start being in control of some of these policies and reforms, that things will actually change. Because I'm pretty optimistic, but I'm not faithful and
Yeah.
too faithful in the current system and policing and things. Because even
Sure.
since George Floyd, there's been shootings
Yeah.
on our Black
Right.
people. So it's just like, you know, I, I don't know, man. But
It's a systemic issue. And you're right. I mean, Gen Z in particular coming into the workforce,
hmm.
diversity, equity, inclusion, non-negotiable. I mean, all of the data coming in is that this is extremely important. And I
So
think
who's
as
Gen Z?
so they're, I think they were
After
born,
us?
yeah, they were born
Okay,
in the 2000s. So I think
gotcha.
after 2000s, the millennials were largely late 80s,
Late
90s.
80s and 90s, yeah.
And millennials too came into the workforce like, I want these things. And then baby boomers, and they just beat it out of us. Nope, it's not the way things work here. Just work
Hmm.
hard. And so we kind of got conditioned. So I do think a cautionary tale there with Gen Z, if they're not given the tools and resources to truly support equality, we're going to have the same problem. So that's why
Mm.
organizations really need to step it up and address these systemic issues. And they're hard to see, just like all the things you said that were hard to see that you pointed out for us from your experiences in
Mm-hmm.
corporate America, there's little things like performance review bias, right? Where you go
Yeah,
recruiting people, you just don't think about. And you saw this in the tech industry. It's just white male. And where people go
that's
to
true.
college, it's so interesting the associations we make with the white male majority that keep just by default keeps others out of those processes. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a lot of work to do. It's a big commitment and it's daunting. And so empowering these next generations, handing over the keys. I think you're right. Like politically, we've got a lot to gain by getting new generations involved in politics, but that takes time.
But I don't understand why it has. I know it takes time, but I don't understand why it has to take that long. You know why? We're in
I
control.
know.
I don't understand so much about our society when it comes to things like that. We live in our society and we make the rules for our society. There's nobody
Right. Why do we have to
standing over
wait?
us with a magic wand saying, "Nope, can't do this." Like we can change tomorrow if we wanted to. We just don't want to. That's what I
Yeah.
think it is.
It's there's barriers and a lot of them are really invisible. So I know we could go on and on, Terrance.
I know. Can, man.
Well, for now, we'll hit pause on the conversation. I think we covered a lot of ground. So
Okay. Thank you. This is great.
thank
I love this.
you for sharing your perspectives. And I think especially for listeners that want a window into the world, if you don't have a lot of Black friends or you don't know what
Mhm.
it's like Terrance shared the story of growing up in the South, what an interesting window into a world that probably is very different than the one you grew up in.
Absolutely.
These are great stories and thoughts and ways to practice empathy when you have these real issues surfacing in the workplace because they are real issues. So
Absolutely.
Terrance, let our listeners know how can they connect with you, ask you questions, talk more with you after the show.
Yeah, sure. So I'm kind of a weirdo. I have no social media, but
How did I
but
find you?
right. But you can hit me on I'm on LinkedIn, Terrance Bell, Terrance Jerron Bell. That's Jeron is the middle name, Jerron. You can I have you can just call me. Email. I'm in Baltimore, Maryland. If you happen to anybody's in Baltimore, I'm not hard to find.
We'll put your
Um,
email in the show notes and
yeah,
link to
yeah,
your
help me out
LinkedIn
here, man.
bio.
I have
Yeah.
nothing.
Well, no, I think you have a lot to offer, and I'm so thankful for your experience and sharing your story with us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. This is great. I anything we can do to help move the ball forward, I'm with it. So thanks for having me. This has been
Thanks,
fantastic.
Terrance. Thanks so much for listening to this episode. Who do you know that needs to hear this message? Hit the share button, connect with me on LinkedIn. You can find Terrance and I there. Search my name, Julie Kratz, Kratz, and I post daily on new topics and episodes. You can find this episode anywhere you get podcasts. Every review helps others find us. I host this podcast because I believe we're stronger together. We are one.